So we're back, and this is our next session. I'm just a little bit early, so I'm just going to bring Jan up with us all. So I'm just finding you, Jan. So let's have a look. And I'm going to bring you up stage. Ah, there we go. I'm just getting there, Jan. There we go.
You can't see me. Let me put on my camera.
Okay. Yay! There she is.
Do I have an echo?
No, I think you're good. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just give it one more minute. We're just a little bit early. We thought we'd put you up on stage. We've got 4 joining us. Let's have a look. Janka Janssens from the Netherlands. And Emma's here. Emma's presenting at 4 o'clock. Hi, Emma. Janet's here from World Horse Welfare. Hi, Janet. And you are here, which is good. So we'll just give it another minute and then we should. Let's just have a look. Direct messages are good. Jan, do you want to share your screen, or are you going to, like, you and I are going to chat?
I'm going to talk about some stories, but I don't have slides.
No, that's what I thought. I had forgotten, to be honest. So well done. Okay, so it's dead on time. So I would like to get started. Let me just check the feeds. I'm just looking at messages and attendees. Cool. We're looking good. Fantastic. So, big warm welcome to you, Jan. You have improved and enriched my life in ways I didn't even know needed enriching. So, really, I think how you show up and your diversity in my communities has blown me away, to be honest, Jan. You are a member of Espresso with Equicoach and a member of Coffee with Horse Lovers. Both of these are online communities, and you and I have worked together, me as your coach, you as my consultant. I really love the way that we ebb and flow between learner and knower, and we sort of have that really exquisite space for each other. And when I invited you to talk for us at International Women's Day and you said yes, I was so delighted. I was like, yay, Jan's going to come and talk to us. And the reason why I'm so delighted is you really are a breath of fresh air for equestrianism, in my opinion. So we're going to hear your story. I hope everyone's got a cup of tea with them. We're going to dig into your title, which is what happens or what to expect when you go out to improve the world. Thanks, Jan.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm going to say I represent the novice horse person who doesn't know a great deal about horses or about riding, but wants to learn. So that's the role I play in a lot of my interactions with people. Unfortunately, I wish I could play a more experienced role, but so far I'm not able to. But what I was going to talk about today is something I used to teach my students who I was preparing to be scientists and change agents through that role. And the story may seem, if you're a horse person, you're wondering, well, why is she talking about the history of medicine? But I think the history of people who've done things in the world that have made a big difference informs us of what to expect when we try to change the world. So I'm going to tell 2 stories. One about Semmelweis, which you might have heard of. He was an Austrian physician in the 1800s. And then I'm going to jump to 2008 and talk about the Nobel Prize and what those people experienced in relationship to what they did. And then we'll take lessons. What we will learn from that is what to expect when we try to change the world, so that we can arm ourselves to be able to do that in a way that allows us to have the courage to do that. And what I was going to say, Leeuwenhoek, who you probably heard of, he discovered the existence of microbes in 1673. The dates aren't important, but the distances between the dates are important. And then in 1844, Semmelweis graduated from medical school in Vienna with an MD degree, and then the same year he got an obstetrics certificate. And he worked in a hospital with 3,000 OB patients. And people were afraid to go to the hospital because it meant death for them. Women would avoid going at all costs. By 2 years later, he was head of 2 units there. And it was a natural experiment because on one unit, there's a disease called childbed fever, which is when you give birth under unsterile conditions, which we know now, you get contaminated and then you get a fulminating infection throughout your whole body and you die. And often both the mother and baby would die. But in one unit, there was a 10% death rate. And in the other unit, there was only about a 3% death rate. In the unit with the high death rate, they were cared for by physician trainees, and in the other unit by midwives. And so he had a natural experiment. He kept wondering, why do I have this change? He tested everything, the path of the priest going through the unit, the position of the women in labor, because the midwives did it differently than the physicians. He looked at the air in the unit. What else did he look at? He looked at whether or not people had a high forceps delivery or a forceps delivery. He looked at the position of beds within units to try to see who was getting this disease. He could never figure it out. And finally, his teacher, only the physicians did autopsies. And his teacher and friend nicked his finger. Actually, a student nicked this teacher's finger during an autopsy. And his friend died, and he attended the autopsy, or he read the autopsy of his friend, and he made the connection that it was the cadaveric material that had entered this man's finger, and his symptoms and his characteristics were exactly the same as what he had seen in the childbed fever women. And so all of a sudden, and he knew what the smell, he had had the smell of autopsy cadavers on his hands and knew how hard that was to get off. Anyway, he was able to make this connection that it was the cadaveric material that was being transferred from the cadaver room into the women's cervixes when they would go in to palpate the cervix. And he instituted a hand washing regimen with lime and chlorinated water and reduced in that year the infection rate to what it was on the midwives unit. The midwives didn't do autopsies, and that's why they didn't have the same rate. And then but the next year, they fired him from the hospital. His ideas were not valued by the people above him. And he basically lost his job. He moved to Budapest and got another job, actually as the head of OB. And there, over the next 5 years, he reduced the infection rate from the 3% that he had achieved in Vienna to less than 1%. So he was saving women's lives, and he was a very sensitive and humanitarian person. When you read his report of his work, you see the angst that he felt because he knew that he had been responsible for people's deaths by the fact that he had gone to the autopsy room and then gone in and examined the women, and they had died. And he wanted so much for other people to adopt what he knew to save women's lives. He was really concerned for saving women's lives. Well, let's see, by 1867, people began, now this is 20 years later, Lister came out, and because he understood that cleaning instruments in surgery, if you clean things, that was good and you could reduce death rates. And then that got transferred, it began to be transferred into obstetric practice. But it wasn't until, I'm going to get this date, when was Pasteur? Pasteur was giving a lecture at the Medical Institute at Paris, the Academy of Medicine at Paris. And there was a discussion, they were talking about, no one knows what the cause of childbed fever is. You know, we can't do anything about it. No one will ever know that. Pastor went over to the board and wrote on the board, a circle on the board. It says, this is the cause of childbed fever. It's a cocci bacteria. We now know it's streptococcus. And the whole Academy of Medicine was astounded. And that year was 1879, 43 years after that Semmelweis was able to intervene in childbed fever. So Semmelweis died of a nick on his finger, and he was actually at 47 years old. He was admitted to an insane asylum because, you know, the angst of, I think, all this and his sensitivity made him vulnerable. But in the asylum, they finally identified that he had a micro nick on his finger from an autopsy that developed into gangrene, and he died at 47. So now let's skip ahead to 2008. Let me pull up my note there so I can get it. The Nobel Prize was won for chemistry by 2 biologists and 1 chemist for the discovery of what causes the glow in jellyfish. And they were able to develop a system where they could put that into the DNA, and then they can watch the development of how DNA is creating change. Like you can see the hand develop because it's glowing in a mouse fetus. And so you can watch how the genes turn on. And it's a huge benefit. It's made all the difference in the world to our understanding of embryological development and other diseases. So they won the Nobel Prize in 2008. The 3 of them thanked another man. They only give 3 awards, but they all thanked the 4th man. They brought him to the conference with him and paid his way. And each of them acknowledged his contribution in his speech. His name is Doug Prasher. At the time when they acknowledged Doug's contribution to their work, because he had discovered the actual gene in the jellyfish that did that, and freely gave it to these people who were doing this other work. And they said he should have won with him. What was he doing when they did that? He was driving a courtesy cab at a Toyota dealership in Florida. He had lost his academic appointments through a series of events. He didn't get tenure. He didn't get his grant, and so he lost his lab. And then he moved to another place. That place was cut. So here's a man who did the work for a Nobel Prize, and his life was driving a cab in Florida. One of the Nobel laureates hired him in his lab as a colleague working in the lab. So those are my 2 stories about what to expect when you change the world. And what are the lessons that we can take from that? One is that people don't always appreciate it. They don't get it at first. It's hard for them to change. In Semmelweis's case, major professors in universities who were in charge of huge obstetrics hospitals couldn't understand the evidence, couldn't assimilate the evidence. It was too, I don't know why they couldn't, but in some of those cases, 26% of the women in their hospitals were dying. And one hypothesis was they couldn't accept the responsibility for it that would be implied by acknowledging what Semmelweis knew. Anyway, I'm going to stop there and talk about what does this mean for us as we try to teach people about equitation science. And one of the big messages, I think, for me is accessibility to that knowledge. It's very hard for novice people who don't have PhDs like I do to get access to that knowledge, say on the web or when they're searching for ways to help their horses. It's not accessible. That's the first thing. And I think that's probably one of the greatest things that we need to address. Maybe you think it is accessible, but I can tell you from my experience, it's hard.
Mm. Jan, do you want to? Oh, a bit echoey. Do you want us to talk about this here now, like accessibility, and or should we do it at the end? How would you like to structure this?
Well, and I don't know, is Bekki on? Shall we bring Bekki up?
Yeah, let's do it. Bekki, if you make it easy for me, you could just go to raised hand and then I can easily just pop you on the stage. Does Bekki know that you're going to bring her up?
Yeah, he does. Bekki has had a recent experience. She can talk about her experience.
Oh, lovely. Okay, hang on then. Come on, Bekki. I hope you're here.
I guess one of my other messages is that we need to have the courage of Semmelweis, and also Pasteur's work wasn't accepted. He got in terrible fights with people. They didn't believe him, etc. So we have to have the courage of these people.
Thank you, Jan. That's so good. Hey, Bekki.
Hi. You have to excuse us because I'm in the middle of losing my voice, I think. So.
Well, listen, I love this. So, Jan, tell us tell us a bit more about why Bekki's on stage and what then Bekki's going to share.
Bekki does grooming of horses, and she's recently decided and drew a line in the sand that she was no longer going to twitch horses. And because of that, she lost a lot of clients. She got a lot of criticism online, but I'm going to let Bekki tell what her story was and what happened.
So basically, I've done grooming for freelance for coming up 4 years now, self-employed, and it was always a case of horses, they're good to twitch or they're not good to clip even, or not good to clip. So they're not good to clip ones, you would either twitch them or you would sedate them to get them done, basically. And that was always kind of the way of life, so to speak, because that's what I had always done. It's what everyone else did around us. And then kind of I was more and more aware of like equitation science and the principles of learning theory and things like that through university. And then it was when the Rovang paper came out in October last year, I think it was, and I was reading it, and it was the bit about when they were talking about the twitch replicating, like the way a predator would grab a horse and it's actually the fight or flight response. And so much of it just resonated because we'd had it where when you made me think, it was almost like, God, I've been doing that to horses for this long, and it's actually not what everyone made, because it's always been made out it's a way of putting them to sleep, it's really nice for them, it's lovely, but actually when you look at the actual implications of it, it's really wrong. So kind of that day I sat down and I was like, right, no, that's it. And I put a post on my page and said, no more, this is why. And I gave them an explanation, gave them the link to the paper and everything, saying this is why I'm doing it. And I had clients left, right and centre coming back and saying to us, well, if you're not twitching my horse, you're not coming to do anything with my horse. And I was like, yeah, I can't twitch them, but I was like, I've got loads of different options. We can come, we can train them, we can desensitize them, we can habituate them to the clippers and get them used to them. No, you're not doing it. And I was thinking, and it got to a point where I was losing so many clients where I thought, is this really worth it, sort of thing. So then I had that internal battle with myself as to going with my values or going with the financial stability I had through my job. And it was really hard because there was so many times I thought, should I just go back and do it because life was easier then, sort of thing. And then all of a sudden it kind of turned a corner, and it was a kind of a thing where people would go, oh, your horse is nervous, speak to Bekki will help you train your horse and get them used to the clippers and and it's gone from there. So now next week I'm going to train a horse for the farrier because it's scared of a rasp. So it's kind of snowballed from there, and now it feels like everything, all the decisions I made were worthwhile, and it was the right thing for me and the right thing for the horses, and it really showed me which clients shared the same values as me, and who really wanted the best for the horses and not just saying that they want the best for the horses, kind of thing. As horrible as that sounds. And
yeah. Becky, can I?
People were.
We're lovely to hear your story, and it's lovely that I'm privileged as well to get to know the whole story. Can we just go straight now to being recognised on the, I'm going to say, in the equestrian community? So tell us what happened about 3 weeks ago. Tell us, there was quite a big recognition.
Yeah, it was massive. So one of the companies that I use lots of products for, is Lister, and I use all of their clippers, all of their trimmers. I had used other companies and I just could never get on with them. So I was like, I'm just going to stick with them. And it was just a normal thing for me. Stick with what I like, sort of thing. And I never recommend anything to people that I don't like. And I was sitting one day and a message popped up on my inbox from them. And I thought, oh, what's going on? And they said that they had recognised how educational my business was and sort of how welfare forward my approaches were, and they wanted me to represent them as part of their professional team. So kind of now they've given us like so much stuff. Like I've had nearly £700 worth of free stuff in 3 weeks from them, just because I push kind of pro welfare and their clippers at the same time. So, I mean, it was nice because I knew I had loved their clippers, but then they started posting things about don't flood your horse. Why do you twitch your horse? You shouldn't be twitching your horse. And it made us think like this is really a company that shares exactly the same values as me. And for it to be such a big company, made to be such a small thing, like it meant a lot.
Well, they listed you, didn't they, on the page? Tell about under Carl Hester's groom. You're listed there.
Yeah, my name's next to Alan Davies' name. Not right next to. He's part of their elite team because obviously he's a big gun. But I'm just a step under him.
Okay,
so you're Semmelweis.
Okay, so Jan, bring us back to the sort of what the story is and what the sort of take home is for us. It's lovely to hear Becky's story.
Okay, one is that it might not have come out so well. You know, when you try to change the world, sometimes you try and you get beat up. The world doesn't want to hear it. That's one thing, but you have to keep going because the effect you may have, unfortunately, may be 20 years away or 47 years away. And the other thing is that small things can matter. It doesn't have to be a huge thing that you do. It could just be a small thing that you do. And I was going to go back to Cammie's story about talking to the women that she was talking to, the coaches. You need to do more learning theory. People can't do what they don't understand. And so somehow the real trick is going to be to get that more accessible. And one example might be to have, if we could convince some universities to adopt that as the theme for their entire curriculum and become exemplars, like Semmelweis's hospital or other kinds of things, then you can begin to disseminate that information, at least among the people being trained. The people already practicing, it's a different problem, as Semmelweis's story shows. And it's going to be the people who are curious. We need to tap into the people who are curious and looking for solutions. And that's where I was thinking, like on the web, in the accessibility to novices like me, must be thousands of women out there who don't, they've fallen off, they're afraid of their horse, they don't know what to do, they need help, and they're looking for help. They want to be good owners and they want to be loving caregivers, but they need the support and help. So people like Becky can develop online training, and Lisa's good, but Lisa can't serve 3,000 people. There has to be allowance and support within that community, perhaps even a group of people who get together and provide that online support and help each other. Instead of being in competition with each other, be facilitators of each other to increase the accessibility and the ability to disseminate. The other thing I was going to suggest is to help yourself emotionally is get a story. I used to look at the Nobel women in science, and I would made my students read a chapter, and we would talk about it. And then I would ask them, who's going to be your mental mentor? Who are you going to remember when you run into problems and conflict? And one is, and they chose one. And then they modeled their life after that person, and they were able to persevere in a different way because of it. When hardship comes, you say, remember Semmelweis, what he did. And then you can join the army with Semmelweis. You don't feel so alone. The other thing, or unjustly treated, or those kinds of things. What else was I going to say? One more thing. I don't know. One of the research I did, I used to think it was fairly trivial. It wasn't trivial. It was important. I increased the placement of nasogastric tubes for feeding children, proper placement, from 54% to 92% by using different ways of putting the tubes down. And I thought, well, in the scheme of things, cancer, it's not that big a deal. But even after I retired, a physician from Canada wrote me an email and said, do you have a mnemonic for your equation? They had lost a baby on his unit. And he wrote me and asked me for help, which it touched me so much to realize that what I did was important. It was not trivial. So remember who you are. Be brave.
Wow, how gorgeous is that? Let me just thank you so much, Becky, for popping up. I think stay here, will you, for us, Becky? I'm going to run through, thank you so much, Jan. I'm going to run through the comments as they came in. There's loads, it's lovely. So Menka's asked, where do you think accessibility should be and in what form? So can I put the accessibility ones together? Shirley's put here so many levels of accessibility to go through. And then there was one more about accessibility, I think. No, that's it. So accessibility for exploration science, that was really quite an important take home for us. Do you want to try and explore that a bit more, Jan?
One of the things I think is students need research projects, and I'm sure that in the way they're trained, they're rewarded for looking at horse behavior. But there's also learner behavior in learning how to ride horses and understanding horse behavior. And one of the things, like I got the McLean tapes and I got the McLean book, but where I was, I've learned, like Lisa talks about peeling the onion, and there's many nuances, that it's not just a recipe thing that you can, get 3 pieces of information and go and do very successfully. There's a different level of understanding, and I don't know that we're teaching to that as well as we should, to help people actually learn how to implement this process in a very successful way. And like, I've sponsored 3 clinics in the United States, and when Kate Finner, when ISIS was in Gulf, I brought Jody Hartstone and Kate Finner down to my house. And Jody, she had one clinic and she had to go back to New Zealand, and I'd sponsored Jody before to come down to the United States from Canada when she came into Canada. But when Kate was here also with Jody, I tried to get her teaching sessions within universities, and I was successful. Beginning to now more, but I think that will help people to understand how to make it more accessible. We can guess at it now, and we can do better, especially if we talk about, maybe there needs to be some conferences about how to make these things more accessible, instead of thinking, oh, people aren't going to learn it. Some people will learn it, but it needs to be accessible to them. And I was going to I was just going to say, if you can allow your students to do research on, all right, we're going to teach these students this module, how well do they actually implement it? And especially if you have different levels, because people like me have no experience with horses. I started riding when I was 79. I mean, not 79, 69. I'm worried about being 79. So anyway, 69 years old. And I didn't have experience with horses. I did have llamas, I had dogs, stuff like that. But anyway, some people don't even have that. So they haven't read the horse.
So much food for thought, and I think the questions have been coming in. I just want to go back to what the delegates are thinking and what they're asking of for both Bekki and Jan. Menka came in and said, finally, in capitals, great to hear that welfare is also recognised as bringing business. So that was really a link that Menka could see, that welfare and advancing all lives to live a good life. I think that's something that is exciting. Shirley's come in and said, I don't know how it is in other countries, but riding instructor courses in Israel do not even mention learning theory. And you put here, Shirley, straight afterwards, I agree that collaborations are a way to build a professional community. Supporting each other is so important. Any comments or thoughts?
I'm going to have to read that again, sorry, because I've totally just forgotten what you've already said. Yeah, so I know over here, the BHS, with theirs, they only bring in learning theory at stage 4. So you have to get through stage 1, 2, and 3 without it, and then learn about it in stage 4. And I always think, logically, it should be introduced to stage 1. It should be something you know from the beginning, and then when you progress through, you learn more and more and more. Much like you do with the horse care side of it, or the lunging side of it and things. They expect that a little bit more from you every time. So I understand at stage 4 it's probably easier to implement, but I think they need to bring it in from stage 8.
Go on, Jan, do you want to say something?
I was going to say, the other thing I was going to say is that we talk a lot about horse welfare, but horse welfare is rider welfare. And I think I know that the ISIS principles now talk about rider welfare, but we can't ignore the interaction that creating a calmer, happier, more well-trained horse is got to be safer for the rider. And there's a big problem with rider welfare, as we know from the braving paper and from the amount of falls that people have and injuries.
Just loads of food for thought, and I think we're having the conversations, and circling back or closing the loop, I think is going to be a process. So just let's pick up some more comments. We've got inspirational Bekki from Jeanette. Thank you for sharing that, Jeanette. Jill's recognised your contribution, Jan. As a mum who has had babies who had to have tubes, this makes a massive difference. Shirley saying truly influence change, Jan. Gail said what a lovely presentation, thank you. Anne's put amazing and inspirational stories, thank you. Thank you. Menka's, this is an interesting one about the coaching, curriculum. Great point. We need to help people to understand and look at our own teaching methods. Many riders don't have high levels of education. There's another diverse lens perspective. Interesting. Instead of introducing it as a base, I wonder why that is. Thank you, Bekki. Jill's put here, it's an interesting comment regarding ease of implementation. It's still a huge learning process with education science. Susan's put here, Andrew McLean introducing me to learning theory changed my life. My instructor's course has learning theory on the first module, and second is all about biomechanics. I think first you need to show the horse what to do and then how to do it. So thank you for sharing that, Susan. That's great. And then Jeanette's been here, so many truths in this whole presentation. So really, we're having the conversations. The delegates are interacting. Bekki's come up on stage. Shall we just pose the question about the time frame? How many of you are actually comfortable that it's going to take the time it needs to take? So I know Jan and I talk about time all the time. Jan and I talk about time because Jan feels that
old.
Like you gave us 2 stories about it took the time it took to get, like, is there any sort of like, is there a fast hack? Is there sort of, can we fast track progress and change? Or
we can
is
try. Let me say some things that might help. One is that what I'm trying to do right now is to name the problems. And one, I want to bring something home, like where would I go in the middle of the United States to get a mentor for equitation science training? And I have to pick some camera. I have Lisa, I have Kate, I have Kate's training, I have Lisa's training, I relate to Jody. But it's hard, a little bit hard to access all that stuff. And part of that problem is the learner itself, my own abilities and in energy, etc. But, I can't take Andrew's course online because I don't ride well enough. So even if I had the money to do it, which I do, but a lot of people don't. So where are people going to get this level of intensity of training that they need out in the boonies to get better? And I bet you have more people than you realize you do. I know when you all go to shows and things, you think you don't have anyone, but there's still an army of other people out here who aren't going to shows, who are trying to understand how to do better with their horses. And even people who have trainers are often dissatisfied with their trainers and looking for other things. And I actually got fired by my trainer because I kept wanting her. I'm strong enough to, this is speaking of journey, I'm strong enough to say, don't teach me that way, teach me this way. And it was very difficult for her to change, to teach me this way. So I have to find someone else. But where can you find it?
I think you've just circled us to young people, actually, and the fact that there's going to be gaps right now, but we know that Pony Club Australia are really trying to create a foundation in the next generation, in young people, and this is now actually flowing through at Pony Club at grassroots level. That's in one country. And we're all around the world. It's International Women's Day, so it's great to have the conversations. I know that this is not even, we haven't even picked the scab off this. This is just raising awareness, and that's fantastic that we get to raise awareness on International Women's Day about the accessibility of the latest knowledge. Now, remember, we're constantly doing research and rethinking, so this will be outdated too. I just feel like that, the fact that we're talking about putting horses at the center of all our decisions is just, well, it's a great starting point. The start before the start, as some of us might say. Time is probably the most valuable resource, and I think we're just coming up. We've got about 10 minutes left, I would say, just under 10 minutes. Let's just look at some of the comments about, so Shelley's put here, I think taking the long road is usually quicker when you are aiming in the right place. Any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I think the problem we have here, I don't know if it's the same everywhere else, is that when people send the horses away to be started, they want them backed, riding away, doing everything in about 6 weeks. And to me, that's not enough time at all. Everyone kind of is looking for the quick way around it to get to what they want to be doing. And I think going that way, you then experience the problems further down the line where you find the holes in the training, and then you have to shape all the way back down to then come all the way back up, and then you come across something else. Whereas I think if you just take those little steps at the beginning, yes, it might take a bit longer to start with, but it will be a lot easier in the long run because you're not going to have those holes in your training you're going to come across.
Also, I mean, we could talk a bit like we did it this morning. We had a session at 8 o'clock, and we've gone quite a few hours since then about language. And who gets to decide what's the right place to end at? So just looking at our language, like I just believe it's about getting it right for horses, which means we actually go off on different paths and we make mistakes and we come back, to be berated or bashed for traveling down a path that later on you realize wasn't that optimal. I know we had the recent loss of life of Matthew Wright, the event rider, who had huge success early on in his career. And then as he got older, just lost attachment to that person he was then. And he traveled down a different path. And that didn't seem to give him like he looked at training horses differently. And I'm just trying to explore when we are righteous and we think there's a right path, what does that mean for horses? Because I do believe that in 5 to 10 years from now, even what I'm coaching, well, not what I'm coaching, what we're all coaching, if we are looking at latest information, and there's Lorna's here, there's quite a few lecturers and college, university lecturers here, Anne's here, a coach delivering the latest in learning theory, we should all be outdated. Like, that is the point, isn't it? Like, when we're trying to get it right for horses. So we've all got to be able to let go of what we're doing today. And I'm not sure that is an easy human trait, perhaps, to rethink things and change.
One thing I was going to say is, how are we going to, and this is a problem we have in my discipline, which was nursing. But suppose that you have all these stables and programs that are now implementing learning theory, and it's going to become outdated. New knowledge has to be there. How are you going to deliver that information to them? We need to, you start developing systems now to do that. And there needs to be some training programs and riding schools that somebody supports. Maybe you can get Bill Gates to support it. His daughter rides horses. Somebody to show the effects of teaching in a different way of riding, some demonstration programs that could be funded that would help facilitate. And those need to be publicized. They need to be videotaped. They need to go on horse TV. I mean, we're not using all of the opportunities that are out there. Now, it's not easy to do the energy to get all that done. It's a huge undertaking. It costs money. And the universities have to reward it. The systems that are going to develop those things have to be rewarded. And that's another factor. I think and one other thing that I was going to say is there needs to be two levels of thought. One related to people who are in competition or professionals or who want to compete, and then people who don't want to compete. They just want to ride their horses, because I think that's probably a greater percentage. Another big problem is what Bekki is talking about, is that you want to send your horse out to be trained and get it back and then be able to ride your horse. I thought that I get a trained horse, I'd go trail riding. Now I understand that that's not what's going to happen. And people work, like I worked all the time. I worked weekends. And if you wanted to ride a horse and you had that level of commitment, how can we facilitate systems that allow people to do that and still be able to own horses? Because if people can't own horses with the limited time that they have, then the horses won't be in part of the industry. And I'm not sure people are asking these questions. And it's, at least you can think through and list all the problems. Listing all the problems is a start, and thinking how to address them and what are the blocks to each part in a systematic way will help people come together and be more proactive and strategic in developing solutions.
Wow, I think that's given my brain and lots to think about, as always. So thank you, Jan and Bekki. Last little comment, actually, I'm going to give it to one of our delegates, because we've been talking for nearly 45 minutes. And it's from Yasmin. She's put here, accessibility to knowledge is important, but the right mindset, so that word right again, is important. You have it to go beyond your ego and really want to connect with the horse. So thank you, Yasmin, for to put a spotlight on it's beyond knowledge. It's how we're making choices and what we value and how we show up. You've mentioned the word mindset, and we could really dig in there. I think we're going to actually later on with Susan. But let me just see, Menka's here. So this is the Dutch. The KNHS is the Dutch Breeding Society for the Dutch Warm Blood. Is that correct, Menka? Please, you can come up on stage as well, actually, if you want to. She's asked us to build an online education platform on how to take care. Oh no, it's the British Horse. Okay, so it's the online education platform on how to take care of the horse welfare. A great opportunity. Who has asked the rain sensor? That's brilliant. Anybody that would like to help is very welcome. I thought you'd had it smashed there, Menka. On education platform on how to take care of horse welfare. That's a huge agenda, isn't it?
Massive.
Okay.
I want to say one more thing. In taking Semmelweis's story, you can't let all those university professors or all those practitioners who don't believe what you're telling them stop you. You know, we get frustrated. Well, they have, and it goes back to the question of, and I know that you're right, Jasmine, about mindset, but there are people like me and other people who have the right mindset, but we get distracted by the people who don't have the right mindset, and we keep trying to run into them instead of making a turn and reaching out to others. And maybe it's because they're the main part of the industry, like Semmelweis, the main part of the European hospitals. People were dying, but things did change.
Well, listen, on the last minute, Georgie has reached out to Menka and said, actually, if I can help in any way, let me know. Beautiful. Collaboration. This is what it looks like. Menka's just posting her email address. You know, this is really starting to create a community where we support each other, we build each other up, and we've got each other's backs. And, you know, I just think when we look back at this first International Women's Day, I hope we look back at our language as well, because I think it's really interesting how we're still using words like the right and the wrong ways of doing things. If I'm going to have my crystal ball, I think we'll end up navigating away from that language in the future, and it will be much more fluid perhaps, and we will sort of explore the diverse mindsets like that. How cool is that? Like, you know, Jan says, you know, we might hit a different mindset. It's not the fact that it's a different mindset, it's just we're maybe a bit tooled out on how to navigate different and diversity, and perhaps that's our starting point. We actually need to sort of be a little bit more curious about the barriers that we're all facing. So I learned loads from that, Jan. Thank you so much. So much for me to digest. I am going to need a break. Yes, absolutely. And I need a break because next up is Gail from Equine Guelph, and Gail again will have another gorgeous story to share. So Menka's just here. I would love to have you as a validator. Oh, wow. And check if I actually use the correct terms, etc. So that's, I think, from to Becky, I think. Well, whoever. Menka's asking for help. Thank you, Jan, for a great talk. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us. Thank you, Jan. I know it's early there in America. And yeah, that's just given us so much food for thought, and I've got loads to think about.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. See you in a bit. Bye.
Bye.